Now, if you're an alien, you might well wonder what's happened to the human race today, or at least those humans that are manning the halls of the United States Congress. Indeed, it took an unmanned vehicle outside our solar system to best sum up our sorry state. This is what the Voyager 2 spacecraft tweeted from outer space. Due to government shutdown, we will not be posting or responding from this account. Farewell, humans. Sort it out yourselves. And so worried is the Obama administration about sorting this out that it decided to control the message. The order has come down from on high that no U.S. ambassador can explain or speak publicly about this to a quizzical world. And so it's up to us, and we'll try our best. Of course, if we were covering some of the far-flung failing states that we often do, we'd know just how to put it. The capital's rival clans find themselves at an impasse, unable to agree on a measure that will allow the American state to carry out its most basic functions. The current crisis has raised questions in the international community about the regime's ability to govern this complex nation of 300 million people. Well, that was, in fact, a satirical blog today for the online magazine Slate. But of course, this isn't funny, and nor is America a banana republic. It's only the global superpower, the world's biggest economy, and the dollar is the currency of global trade, of course. The cost to the U.S. economy of this shutdown is yet to be determined. But what about the unseen cost to brand USA? Not to mention already the million U.S. government workers on unpaid leave, the medical research projects that are shut down, as well as national parks like Yosemite, which brings in $350 million to the local economy every year. Even Panda Camp at Washington National Zoo is dark. Now, the polls agree that the American people are disgusted at this shutdown. Just look at the front page of this New York newspaper, a tabloid. All of this because of 30 hardline Republicans who refuse to budge. So, is this the new normal? I'm joined now by Ryan Lizzer, who's the Washington correspondent of The New Yorker magazine, and here in London by broadcaster and publisher Andrew Neil. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me. Let me ask you first, Andrew, how is the world reacting to this in Britain today?
I think the rest of the world thinks it's so incredible they don't quite believe it. You know, we're used to dysfunctional governments in Italy or Greece or some banana republic, but on a basic function of government to set, tax and spend and agree a budget, the fact the United States can't do that, people don't quite believe it, so they've not yet faced up to the consequences that could follow.
And what about you, Ryan? Is there any silver lining to any of this? You saw that pretty pointed Daily News front page. People are disgusted. Is this something that's going to pass? Are they going to reach their senses in a day or two?
I think it's very hard to predict exactly what's going to happen, and a lot of us have just been wrong in predicting exactly how the House Republicans would navigate this crisis before. So it's dangerous. I think, you know, is there a silver lining? I hate to say this, but I think one outcome of things backfiring on the folks who brought us to this point is that perhaps this ends the cycle of budgeting and governing by fiscal crisis. Don't forget, in less than 2 weeks, we have a much more significant deadline coming up here, and that is the government is going to run out of its borrowing authority unless Congress acts affirmatively.
Yeah.
So we have two major crises right on top of each other. I think some folks think that this has to end badly for the side that got us into this place for us to not be in this point just in a few more weeks.
Let me just put up these polls then, because the American people are squarely blaming the Congress and the Republicans. 72% of the people oppose a shutdown, only 22% support it. When it comes to the debt ceiling, 64% of the American people would oppose any blocking of that, of raising that. And when it comes to gridlock in Washington, 55% blame Congress, 33% blame President Obama. So, Andrew Neil, the real looming disaster could be this debt ceiling debacle. We've seen it a couple of years ago. America has never faulted on that. It may have shut down the government, but it hasn't done this.
And that's when the ridicule of the rest of the world will turn to anger, because it's not just America that's going to have to live with this. If the debt ceiling isn't agreed, if a new one isn't fixed, there is a strong possibility, indeed even a probability, that the US will default on its bonds. It won't have money to service its debt. Now, the US bonds are by far the most important in the world. They're the benchmark for the rest of borrowing in the world. If America, of all countries, can't service it, we are potentially into a financial crisis much bigger than the one sparked off by Lehman Brothers, and that's when the rest of us begin to suffer, and not just the Americans.
And you know what? That is what sent shivers up my spine today. I heard somebody saying precisely that this could trigger a 2008-style financial crisis. Now, you know, I want to play you both two little pieces of interviews or speeches that both the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, said last night, and President Obama also in a radio interview. I want you to listen to this about the negotiations or lack thereof over the current crisis.
I talked to the president earlier tonight. I'm not going to negotiate. I'm not going to negotiate. We're not going to do this. Well, I would say to the president, this is not about me, and it's not about Republicans here in Congress. It's about fairness for the American people.
I shouldn't have to offer anything. They're not doing me a favor by paying for things that they have already approved for the government to do. That's part of their basic function of government. That's not doing me a favor.
Ryan Lizza, the president is being criticized for not negotiating and for sounding kind of petulant in this regard. On the other hand, Obamacare is his signature legislation, and it's merely bringing, you know, America's health situation fairly in line with the rest of the world. Who is, do you think, not negotiating correctly?
Well, look, you know, in our business, Christian, it's really comfortable for us as reporters to have two sides to blame equally, that Republicans are doing this and Democrats are doing this, and, you know, you, the public, make up your mind. I genuinely don't think that that's the case here. This crisis is the result of about 80 Republicans forcing a course of action on the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, a course of action that he publicly said he did not want to go down. Boehner said he did not want to threaten a government shutdown based on trying to defund Obamacare. 80 very conservative Republicans who won their districts by an average of 34 points. In other words, they don't care about Democrats opposing them. They only care about Republicans primarying them. They forced Boehner to do this. And remember what the crisis is here. It's just a continuing resolution. It's just legislation that funds the government at current levels. They could have passed something that funded the government for another week as they negotiated some of these other issues. So in that sense, there's no reason for the government to shut down. So when the president says, look, that policy is in place, this is their basic responsibility, I think he's got a decent point there.
Well, let me put this to Andrew. Let me put this to Andrew, because he may have a decent point, but also when it comes to the substance, Andrew, you know, we live here, across this country, across the rest of Europe. People believe they have a right to health care, and they have it.
Of course. But the issue isn't really healthcare. It's much more fundamental than that. And it's two things that have happened. Americans love their Constitution. They think it's one of the greatest political constructions the world has ever known. And it is. But it has this complicated system of checks and balances, which, if it doesn't operate, leads to a rigor mortis that would be inconceivable in a parliamentary democracy like Germany or the United Kingdom. And this rigor mortis happens when you look at what's happened to American political culture. They don't want to compromise. They don't want to agree. They hate each other. Now, I was a White House correspondent when Tip O'Neill was the big enchilada in Congress, and President Reagan was in the White House, a liberal Democrat out of the Boston machine and a radical Republican from California. None of this ever happened because they had a basic respect for each other and they knew they had to compromise in the end. That doesn't happen, and a clash of America's Constitution and this rather toxic political culture has made America, at the moment, a dysfunctional democracy.
Well, and this 18 years ago was the shutdown of the government the last time around, and actually it was Newt Gingrich who was then Speaker of the House, and others have said that it was actually Gingrich who started this politics of zero-sum game, the politics of, you know, I have to kill my opponent, and there's extremism.
Well, and of course, much good did it do them then, because the Republicans took a hammering after that. They got blamed for it. But if you're going to have a system in a parliamentary democracy where an overall majority means you can do what you want, that's fine. That's the way we run our system. If you're going to have a system of complicated checks and balances, then compromise and give and take has to be built into the system. And the political culture is such in America at the moment that it's not. And this is a systemic problem, and it's not going to go away. This will happen again. I mean, it's already in 30 years we've had 18 kind of incidents like this. And, you know, America's good at lecturing the rest of the world on governance. I think the rest of the world is going to give America a few lectures on governance.
And let me talk to Ryan now about that, because is there a way out of this? And is there potentially a group of Republicans who might have some kind of insurgency? And I say that because there was a tweet today by someone who's described as a moderate Republican, Scott Ridgell, Republican, saying, we fought the good fight, time for a clean CR, continuing resolution to keep this government functioning. Is that happening? Is this the first time perhaps some moderates or others in the Congress are going to take on the Tea Party?
Well, they tried that yesterday, actually. They tried to, on the last vote last night, 17 or 18 of them tried to get together to force exactly that, a clean CR, and half of them gave up at the end. The truth is the Republican Party is very homogenous right now, and there are very few moderates in the party. What a lot of people think is that Boehner has to show his conservative right flank that this plan is backfiring spectacularly, and that's the only way that he can sell them on the policy course, which is the only way out of this, which is to pass a clean CR and use a mix of Democratic and Republican votes in the House to push that through and then move on to the next crisis.
He's also
I agree with Andrew. The problem is in our system, if you don't have a willingness to compromise, it doesn't work. And right now, on the far right flank of the Republican Party, the idea of compromise itself is opposed.
Mm-hmm. And Boehner is criticized for not even bringing this to a vote. Some say it may actually win because all the Democrats would vote for it, and maybe some Republicans.
Yes, but, you know, I spent 6 weeks with the Tea Party a couple of years ago. They're irreconcilables on this thing. They ain't going to give in. And Mr. Boehner doesn't control them. Indeed, they despise him. They despise him almost as much as they despise President Obama. And if you've got a group like this that is determined to get its own way and not going to give in, here's what's going to happen. Remember the mouth from the South, the man that was President Clinton's famous spin doctor. When he was asked, what would you like to come back as? He said, I want to come back as the bond markets. And if this lot don't sort it out in Washington, the bond markets will take over. And you do not want to be on the wrong end of the bond markets.
Do they get that, Ryan? Do they get that in Congress? Do they care what's happening in the rest of the world?
I was going to say that a second ago. If you look at the 80 Republicans who forced this course of action, they come basically from where you'd expect, right? The South, the Midwest, and the rural West. They're not in places with major cities, and they're not representatives who were elected because of their foreign policy credentials or because of their interest in international economics. And frankly, if you read the conservative press closely, there's an argument that has taken hold among some of these folks that a default on the debt would not be as catastrophic as most people think it would be. And there are some people who think that it would be I know this is crazy to say, but that it would be a good thing, that it would finally force a conversation about spending. And that's probably the most dangerous argument that has taken root.
Playing with fire. Ryan Lizzer, thank you very much for joining me from Washington. Andrew Neil, thanks for being with me here in the studio.